Infestations of peasants are a pretty common nuisance in Rimworld. While we can raid their bases and do our best to drive them off our land, the kindest thing that we can do for them is to gently persuade them with waves of transport pods, so that we can inundate their bases with Antigrain warheads. Laying waste to all those who displease us has never been more convenient. Once those mushroom clouds have cleared, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by how much the value of your new land has increased. There's just something uniquely satisfying about wiping out an entire settlement in one hit. Enemy colonists vanish into walls of flame. And while these pathetic shantytowns are easily leveled by transport pod strike, targeting peasants when they're in horde mode is a little bit more complicated, as hitting a moving target with transport pods can prove to be quite a challenge. With some creative chatting, these large masses of peasants can and should be led. But where to? This fly-bitten horde might be a bit easier to hit with our jury-rigged artillery if we could only figure out a way of getting all those angry tribals to stand still for a moment. Hoping to find a solution to this conundrum, I sent my guy to go ask around the local trade fair, to see if the traders might have some input on the matter. Unfortunately, the tribals and the traders just didn't seem to be getting along, and what began as some harmless chatting had quickly escalated into serious man-on-llama violence. With the traders fighting so poorly, this fictitious trade fair had turned into a deadly hostage crisis. We were left with no choice but to send in our lead hostage negotiator. Weighing in at 500 tons, he drinks chem fuel by the gallon. And he speaks only the language of explosions and justice. Despite the skill and the heroism of our mightiest hostage negotiator, none of the hostages appear to have survived. Logically, if 100 Antigrain warheads cannot provide sufficient levels of explosive force to liberate a couple of hostages, then we are left with no choice but to build a launcher capable of firing 1,000 Antigrain shells at a time. Luckily for us, I've already got one that's nearly complete. After building our weapon of mass destruction on top of a thriving ecosystem, all of these useless animals are technically trespassing on our property. With that mild annoyance out of the way, I placed the blueprints for about 700 transport pods. With about 400 transport pods already built, that would give us a total of about 1,100 transport pods. While it didn't take that long to place the blueprints for this monster, I let the game run on triple speed for a while, as it took over an in-game week for my colonists to get all of the pod launchers built. With the launchers finally completed, we still needed to cut out over 1,000 correctly spaced holes in the ceiling before we could get around to installing any of those pods. To save time, I could have chained all of the transport pods together, but such a launcher would only allow us to launch our warheads in tightly grouped clusters. While these are great for saturating small localized targets, the sheer resource cost for dispersing tight clusters of submunitions across an entire map would probably mean leaving the game running for weeks in real life, just so you could build enough antigrains to fire it once. We don't want to make using this weapon so costly that we have to wait 2 weeks before it can even kill anyone. If we want to blow up an entire map, we're going to have to deploy our Antigrain warheads one by one, so that they can saturate a much wider area, giving us a much more sustained wave of explosions. Despite building up a huge stockpile of munitions, as soon as I started building this monster, my chem fuel reserves were constantly getting wrecked. I suppose I could have called in a dozen raids, so that we could convert 1,000 lowly peasants into chem fuel, but once you're done fighting the raids, and recovering your casualties, you've still got to process your enemies into fuel. At the end of this, you're still left with a massive pile of clothes, weapons and other garbage that needs to be disposed of. To save time, I decided that our 1,000-pod launcher of infinite murder and judgment would now be starting a strict vegan diet. Forced to subsist on a diet of hydroponic vegetables and compromise, the sheer rage and frustration of our missile launcher alone would probably be enough to lay waste to entire planets. I began the dreaded task of loading 1,100 transport pods individually. While they would each be loaded with just a single antigrain warhead, doing anything over 1,000 times is bound to eat into your day. But before we could even manage to load half of the pods, our innocent missile launcher was set upon by its only natural predator, the tornado. Because tornadoes are total bastards, you can't just blow them up to make them go away. This was quite a cause for alarm, as it swerved directly into our helpless missile launcher. While the resulting chain of detonations killed a load of my colonists, it did give us a glance at the true devastating force of our weapons system. Seeing as it was going to take all day to fix this, I reloaded the game. Once I got back to loading the pods, this seemingly monumental task didn't seem so difficult after all. Clicking 4 times and then hitting Catalan V over 1,000 times wasn't quite as mind-numbing as I thought it would be. After about 4 hours of loading pods, our glorious weapon of mass destruction was ready to fire. I wasted no time scouting out an enemy colony. Choosing some flea-infested tribal hovel, I dropped in some nanomachinery and started building a bunker. One wall of this stuff is basically invincible, but I put in 2 layers just to be sure. I drew up a huge targeting grid on the enemy colony itself, so that the pods might have an even distribution. Each one of the 44 squares on this grid was to be targeted with 25 transport pods. The resulting wave of transport pods fell onto the enemy colony in some kind of steel rainstorm of doom. While the peasants looked as baffled as ever, the wildlife seemed a little bit on edge, like they sensed an earthquake, or when a madman is about to blow up the environment. With our seemingly never-ending sea of explosives only ending about 20 tiles from the edge of the map, Vikinga's invincible bunker seemed a little bit redundant. With all of our transport pods launched, and their deadly payload ready and in place, I aimed the detonator pod at the centre of the enemy colony. While some of the boom rats were eager to give their lives in our good name, most of these boom rats proved to be disgusting cowards, running away from tribals armed with pointy sticks, displaying a complete lack of dignity by choosing not to die. While the heroic boom rats managed to miss the antigrain shells when they detonated, that fire will eventually spread. The tribals quickly cornered the remaining boom rats. While these tribals might think they have outsmarted us for now, as they return to their fly-infested hovels, they are in for a particularly nasty surprise, as soon we shall enact our vengeance, and the very land itself shall tremble. Out in the wilderness, a ferret catches its prey, oblivious to the coming storm. As the peasants shamble back to their lackluster dwellings, the hiss of antigrain warheads is the last thing they ever hear. Unable to withstand the sheer brilliance of our justice, the peasants scurry like ants before a madman with a blowtorch, their pathetic shantytown providing no cover from the explosion. As the blast rolls outwards across the map, a wave of unstoppable devastation races out in all directions, chasing down all who try to flee. As more and more of the map is consumed by the cleansing light, the last of the peasants are vaporized as submunitions detonate righteously beneath their feet. Our explosion does not stop at removing all life from the map, as the very mountains themselves are punished for their collaboration with our treacherous foe. The explosion never quite manages to touch Vikinga's invincible bunker. I think this left him feeling just a little bit left out. As the last of the Antigrains detonated, I had to wait a while for the dust clouds to clear. There were a few pieces of furniture that had somehow managed to survive the blast, but I wasn't overly concerned by this, as the fire would take care of that garbage in no time. While we have achieved a great milestone by finally destroying our enemy, their homes, and the very land that once sustained them, I'm still disappointed that our explosion wasn't powerful enough to erase all of their mountains. I even found some warheads who lacked the courage to explode. Due to the extreme disloyalty of this cluster of submunitions, this mountain still stands, mocking us, silently. I regretted the fact that I hadn't measured the diameter of the blast crater in the last video. I drew a line of 25 blocks from the blast crater's widest point. I repeated this slightly awkward method of counting until I had reached the opposite side of the crater. After adding everything up and counting a few by hand, this explosion had managed to set a brand new record, with a blast crater that was 183 blocks wide. Who could have thought that dropping 1,000 antimatter bombs on a primitive settlement could really do so much damage? If we want to cause even more carnage than this in the future, then the next logical step is obviously to build a missile launcher, capable of firing tens of thousands of Antigrain warheads at a time. But I don't think that we can repurpose this launcher to fire 10 times as many pods, so all of this will need to be rebuilt. While this weapon system only managed to fire one shot, it's what it did with that one shot that counts, wiping out an entire settlement of belligerent peasants, and erasing all traces of their ignoble existence with the unstoppable rage of a hungry vegan. What they lacked in efficiency and ease of use, they more than made up for with sheer power, and for that, they shall be missed. Upon Vikinger's heroic return to the colony, I saw fit to reward our champion by enacting a great sacrifice to honour his name. Your everyday run-of-the-mill human sacrifice wouldn't nearly be glorious enough for our champion, so I ordered 30 of my slaves to assemble at the centre of this strange building. After inviting some traders to join in with the ceremony, they happened to be quite willing to share in our rich and vibrant culture. With each of the slaves ready to contribute to the glory of our champion's name, 3 of our acolytes began the ceremony by stamping on a boom rat, conveniently placed right next to a landmine. Inside of the doom chamber, the slaves were ready to meet their fate. Such was the nobility of our champion that yet another slave wished to explode in his name, a request I was all too happy to oblige. They say that Rimworld is a storytelling simulator, but I tend to find that it's the stories with the most explosions that really stay with you. As you might have guessed, this video was quite a lot of fun to make, so if you would like to see more like it, then please subscribe for more crazy content just like this in the future.